G'day everybody, I'm Scott Poynton and welcome to another podcast. And I am very pleased today to be able to introduce you to Ben Page. Ben Page is a forest therapy guide and a forest therapy trainer. And I had the good fortune to encounter Ben when I signed up for a forest therapy guide training course with the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy. And it was a fantastic online course. We might talk about the course as we go through, but it was an online course. And here was this young fella, Ben Page, doing all these videos. And also there's a few sound recordings. And Ben introduced me to the practice of forest therapy with our three fantastic trainers. And I just thought, interesting bloke, love to talk to him, love to learn about his past. I don't know how old Ben is, he'll tell us in a minute, but young fella, and here he is doing these amazing things. So Ben, welcome to our podcast, mate. Great to have you with us.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah. Now, where are we talking to you from? We're on Zoom.
Yep. I'm in Los Angeles.
In Los Angeles, right. So there you go. Isn't that amazing? We can talk across the oceans like that. So Ben, look, that's a bit of an intro. You've got, I'm sure, a pretty fascinating story to tell, I know. And part of the reason I know is that you've just published your first book, and it's called Healing Trees, A Pocket Guide to Forest Bathing. We might come to the book in a minute, but there's a little bit about your childhood and your journey, your love of nature. But if you could just tell us about young Ben Page and the journey you've travelled to this place where you're doing this amazing work with forest therapy.
Yeah, it's kind of a funny thing because I think it's a very common story. A lot of people that come through forest therapy guide training and even people that come on walks or are interested in the book, a lot of them had kind of developmental experiences in childhood that were very close to nature. And part of my thesis is that we're all born completely as nature, fully embodied nature. And then later, we're kind of enculturated into an idea of separateness from nature. And that has to do with individuation and acculturation and education and kind of all these pieces of our ego development that, if unexamined, can leave us with the assumption that we're not actually nature. But I remember as a child just having a very rich sensory life. You know, it's not even to say that nature was because I grew up in a place that had a lot of forest and a lot of preserved land, which was the case for me. But I remember also being fascinated by the sensory experiences inside, that it wasn't just about kind of this nature is somewhere out there. It's like nature is happening within me and all around me. And of course, I didn't understand it in those terms, but I remember as a child enjoying making sounds, clapping rocks together, or seeing what kind of sounds I could make with my hands in the creek. Things like that, just the sights, the smells, the texture, rolling around in the dirt. I was reflecting this weird game I used to play as a child where I grew up in New England, and there would be kind of a snow and then followed by a rain, and then it would freeze, and it would create this layer of ice on top of the snow, so that if your body only weighs 80 pounds or whatever I was, you could basically lay flat on it and use some sticks to kind of simulate like Arctic mountain climbing and pulling yourself up the hill on your belly, and all these kind of, experiences of just being in my body, having a sensory experience of reality. I think that's just something that a lot of people eventually, the word I like to use is remember.
Yeah.
That we spend a lot of time in our heads and kind of cultivating this ego character and really obsessing over who we are. And then we forget about these embodiment experiences that, we all experienced as children, even if you didn't grow up like where I grew up in the woods. I really feel like we all just are born into this, no matter what the setting. So then, I think a lot of my, what I like to say about like training guides and this book and all the things I'm doing is I don't think I'm teaching anything new. I'm just creating spaces for people to remember what they originally came into this world with. And that's kind of my take on forest bathing, I guess.
Yeah. And you're one of the first ones to take it up, right? I mean, in 2015, you trained as a guide, I believe, in 2015.
Yeah, I was in the second cohort of guides, and I was trying to do the math on this the other day. I think ANFT has trained something around 80 cohorts now, which is wild to think about.
Really is.
But yeah, at the very beginning, you alluded to the school, and part of the philosophical idea with the school is that your learning journey doesn't need to always make sense. If you really commit to learning what you're passionate about learning about, you'll eventually kind of effortlessly arrive in a position where you're professionally doing the thing that you just love doing. And that's kind of how I ended up on this forest therapy training, because I was studying things that were maybe connected in some way philosophically, but had nothing to do with ANFT. And I met Amos Clifford, who's the founder of the association. And well, I had met him several times at that point, but it was at this particular program in the Owens Valley that he said, you should come up and take this training. And I really had no concept of what I was getting myself into. In my imagination, it was like a personal wellness practice that he had developed, and he wanted to teach people how to do this. I did not understand that Amos, part of his vision was to have a global network of certified forest therapy guides who are going to be guiding other people into these experiences. So, I came up and took the training, and I just thought it was great. It was a very different training all those years ago.
It was still evolving, right?
Yeah, it's kind of a living experience, I suppose. It evolves kind of every year, and it becomes more nuanced and more refined. And also at the same time, it becomes more simple because you get better at teaching it. I think, it's one of those things where you have to be a good student in order to be a good teacher. So my job for many years was just being a good student and then trying to figure out how to teach it to people. But yeah, it was kind of an accidental, one of those butterfly wing moments where had I not been at the exact right place at the exact right time, maybe none of this would ever have happened. And yeah, basically, a year later, Amos needed someone to co-facilitate a program, and he said, hey, do you want to come do this? I said, yeah, that sounds fun. And then he said, okay, you did a good job. You can be a trainer. And then, fast forward many years, I've been, training people in New Zealand and Australia and the US and Canada, Costa Rica and Norway, the UK, just, seeing all these amazing places and amazing people who are drawn into the work. It's a humbling experience.
Tell us about it, mate. I mean, just give us a bit of background to the forest bathing, and you don't have to go into the whole spiel or anything like that, but I'm sure it's new for a lot of the people listening. So if you can just tell us a little bit about the idea behind it.
So I think this is one of those things I could talk about this for an hour.
I reckon you could.
I think the simplest way to explain why it's called forest bathing, which some people think sounds kind of like a funny name, but it has a good logical explanation. So it comes from the Japanese Shinrin-yoku, Shinrin forest, yoku is bath. And the reason it's called forest bathing is a bit of a double entendre. So the first explanation is a literal bathing in basically the chemical compounds that are emitted by trees and other plant life. So if you can imagine when you're sitting under a tree that the tree is diffusing into the air these chemicals, and you can't see them with your eyes, but if you could see that the atmosphere around the forest and around natural places has this kind of chemical composition hanging in the air. And because we're evolved to basically be in these spaces, it's very healthy for us to absorb these what are called phytochemicals, plant chemicals. The second meaning is a little more metaphorical. And the way I like to explain it to people is that it's kind of like sunbathing. And I like this metaphor because I think people generally kind of intuitively understand what sunbathing is. And it's a very simple thing. There's nothing complicated about sunbathing. There's no striving. There's no effort. You can't do it better. you just do it. And it's really just enjoying the sensation of sunlight upon your body and all the sensory experiences that come along with it. So forest bathing is really just experiencing the forest or nature, however you want to say it, through the intelligence of the body. And yeah, then my interest in this kind of spirals towards a question of, what does it actually mean to be nature? And how do we start to diminish the sense of separateness that we experience?
You talk a lot about nature relation, Ben, don't you? A relationship with nature as opposed to connection. I've heard you talk about that.
Yeah, I kind of struggle with this nature connection language because to me, the word connection implies that you can connect and disconnect. Mm-hmm. Whereas I guess the way I see it, you fundamentally are nature. So it's not a question of connection, it's a question of identification. So it's not that we're going to go out and learn how to connect with nature. We're going out in an effort to learn what we actually are and to experience ourselves in that way. And that is not to say that, I don't have kind of dualistic judgments about what we might call consciousness or reality. It's all contained within this sense of wholeness. So, for me, I feel like a lot of times people, when we get into this conversation, there's this thing about so are you saying, Ben, that you think we should fully identify with nature all the time, that we should basically remember how to experience ourselves as animals? And I'm like, well, it's not to say that you have to experience that all the time. It's just that there are so many ways of experiencing ourselves. This is kind of a question of ontology. How do you understand what it means to be what you are? And we spend a lot of time in the story of who we are. And that's fine. That's not a problem. The thing is to say, well, there's more out there than just Scott. Your access to levels of experience is not constrained to what you can experience through the lens of the character that you're playing. And for me, the most kind of wonderful thing about forest bathing are those moments where I kind of forget that I'm Ben, and I start having a sense of identification with place instead of with ego. That it's this understanding of, it's not only that I'm not me, it's that right now there is this interconnection or interbeing or intersubjectivity, this thing that binds all beings together in place. And it's the most simple example of this for people is often respiration when we're sitting under a tree. You are fundamentally exchanging biological, matter. You're becoming tree, tree's becoming you. The line of separateness is being blurred, and it doesn't require any analysis. Right. You don't need to think about it for it to be real and for it to be happening. So it's not about kind of efforting to see what it is and to understand it as much as it is to relax into being and feeling it.
Yeah. Relax is a key word, isn't it? It really helps people calm down and slow down. And I mean, I don't know how many walks you've guided, must be hundreds. I'm up to number 11, but it's quite extraordinary. And I've had a couple of really busy friends, really busy, work-stressed people come. And when we start the walk, they've got all these questions because they want to know, And I'm like, just try and encourage them. You don't want to say no questions till the end. You want to let them find their way in. But I think in time, my experience was that they settle into it. It's almost like the forest pulls them in and they slow down. And then when we have the gather, share and listen, it starts to get a lot deeper and more profound. And you can watch this progress over the period of the walk. And by the end of it, they're taking deep breaths and they're just like, wow, I really needed that. And over a period of 2 to 3 hours, the transformation can be amazing and profound, isn't it? It's such a simple process as well, the whole way that the forest therapy, the standard sequence of the forest therapy unfolds.
Right. There's a phrase that I've been using a lot lately in my work, which is a Chinese proverb. It says, tension is who you think you should be. Relaxation is who you are.
Mm.
And I think this is kind of, again, speaking to this question of identity, where it's like our ego selves, the characters we play. I think the reason why people suffer from some degree of kind of anxiety or nervousness before the walk starts is because you kind of already know that you're going to be kind of leaving yourself at the door.
Right.
Like doing things like, very simple invitations, just sitting under trees, smelling flowers, listening to the sound of water. These don't require you to be yourself anymore. Like, you don't need to hang on to all of the story of who you are to have very immediate experiences in reality. And there's a lot of sensation that comes when we relax into, being in that space.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people, it's like there's a natural sense of tension around, am I going to do this right? Am I going to be good at this?
No gold stars.
Do I get a gold star at the end? How do I know if I'm doing it properly? So this is true of my guiding, but also very true in the book, is I try to keep telling people, like, if you just take some time to go do what you might call forest bathing, which is basically doing whatever you feel like doing out in the forest and just being there. Like, there's no right or wrong way to do this, really. Everyone's going to have a very unique process. And I've provided some tools, you could say, to cultivate good process. But the idea here is this is not product oriented. Like, my book and also my guiding is not selling you something like I'm going to sell you a sense of relaxation or a sense of calm, or I'm going to sell you a profound experience, or I'm going to sell you joy, or I'm going to I can't give you any of these things. I can only help create a space where you can find those things all by yourself. And that requires each person to kind of have their own process around what we could call forest bathing. And that's been a really cool and interesting journey for me, like going to conferences and meeting people that are doing something similar, perhaps, but with different styles and different cultural frameworks. It really becomes clear that this is not about exclusion and saying like there's one right way to do this. It's very personal. It's very unique for people. So I try to really make a point in the book and in my training, especially, that this has to make sense for you. Otherwise, it's just a performance.
Right.
I think there is a lot of performance that goes on in kind of these nature worlds.
I agree. I think you're right.
And it's like you can really just be yourself. There's no need to be like special. I don't think I'm special. And I think I'm just doing it the way I'm doing it. So I hope people will. Self-directed learning is hard, right?
Right.
This goes back to the school. Most people just want the answers. Like, they just want to be told, how do I get the thing that I want to get? And it's hard for people who are not used to self-directing their learning process to cultivate processes like that. So I think the book particularly is kind of, this will give you some tools to at least start cultivating your process. I hope that's how people will experience it.
Well, we'll make sure we share a link to the book so people can find it and get a hold of it. It's a beautiful book, mate. I was very privileged for you to send me a copy, and I followed there's not too many instructions in there, but one of them is to read it outside and enjoy it outside, and I did. And no, it's really great. Look, we mentioned the school before we started recording, and we've just touched on it a couple of times. You have founded a school, and I'd love you to just share a little bit about the principles, because I think it's very aligned with what you've been talking about with forest bathing, right? Tell us about the school, mate.
Well, I co-founded the school many years ago. I think it was 7 years ago.
How old are you, Ben? How old are you?
I'm 34.
34. So you've co-founded a school when you were 27.
Yeah. The school is called the Open School. The model is called self-directed democratic education. So the self-directed part means there's no teachers, tests, classes, or curriculum. Every child, we take 5 to 18-year-olds. So every student basically has to figure out how to fill up their time every day with what they're actually interested in. And I'll come back to that in a second. I'll give you the full definition. So the democratic part is that every adult and every student has one vote each. It's an equal vote, and everything is decided democratically by majority. So the kids are actively involved in hiring and firing the staff, allocating the budget, administering justice, creating the rules, basically all administrative tasks in the school, including the things that are more traditionally thought of as like adults only, are basically all run with the kids. They are collaborators in designing the environment and creating structures that actually work. So the interesting thing about the self-directed piece for me is this thing about tension is who you think you should be, relaxation is who you are. Because I think a lot of conventional education models, there is kind of an implicit assumption that learning will be stressful. And I don't think I really agree with that. I think learning can be really easy and fun. And it's a question of understanding, well, my interpretation is that it's a question of understanding the neuroscience of learning. Like, we kind of understand now that basically what the brain is doing is trimming away things that it doesn't find use for, which explains why you learn a lot maybe you learned a lot in your education, Scott, and you've forgotten some of it, right?
I've forgotten a lot of it, mate.
Yeah. Like for me, I learned French for whatever, it was like 10 years. And I don't remember a lot of it because I never use it. It's not something I really have a lot of utility for. And it's not my fault. It's not a question of like, I wasn't disciplined enough. It's just a neurological phenomenon. So when you're self-directing your learning, you're learning something because you're really passionate about it and you're excited. And then there's this thing called collateral learning, where you're picking up other pieces of learning as you learn the thing you're actually passionate about. For example, we had this girl once who said, I hate math and I never want to learn it. Okay, fine. So a few months later, she's like, I really want to learn how to bake cupcakes. And, from my perspective, there's like this kind of like wicked laughter in my head, like, haha, like you've totally committed to learning math, And she did, but there was no pain. In her previous educational experiences, this is a phenomenon called educational trauma, where basically if you force a child to learn something before they're interested in learning it, it can convince them that learning is stressful and painful. So then they avoid learning because they've already made that association. So this girl came with educational trauma around her ability to do mathematics, and she ended up basically starting an educational journey in learning math by baking cupcakes. So pretty much all of the things that traditionally people are like nervous about, is my kid gonna learn how to do this or that? Almost all of it gets picked up naturally just by basically being in the world. Right. Reading, writing, math, like you kind of need these things to do almost anything. And what's interesting is that, and I think this is a generational difference that older adults have a hard time getting this, is that you can learn to do anything on the internet now. It's totally bonkers. Like when I was a kid, we had encyclopedias. Right. That was how much information you had access to. And now you have access to such an enormous world. And these kids are doing really amazing things. Like there's a lot of in like my master's degree, we would have called this adultism, which is kind of a power and privilege system that preferences adults over children. And it operates under the assumption that children are kind of subhumans. Like they haven't quite reached this level of humanness that is an arbitrary age. In the United States, we usually say it's 21 is when, that's when you can basically do most of the stuff. 18, 21, rent a car at 25. I mean, when are you a grown-up? Yeah, how do you know?
Right.
But there's a lot of fear of young people, I think. And this is kind of like this is a mythology that has evolved for hundreds of years, that the older generation is often fearful of the younger generation, assuming that they are basically trying to usurp power from them. And so there's this very kind of complex dynamic between young people and old people, where old people are like, we have to force you to be good people. And the definition of good that we are applying here is from us.
Our perspective, yeah.
So then the adult privilege is kind of used in an authoritarian way to kind of like tell all these young people, this is what it means to be a good person, instead of cultivating like a really open mind of like, well, how do you develop process around understanding what you think is right and wrong? And when you're involved in community building, you grapple with that every day.
Right.
Like, it's interesting that in the history of the school, the students have actually kind of instituted different judicial systems. So for a while, we were doing basically a justice system loosely based around the American justice system, where, you know, you have rights, you can plead innocent or guilty. There's a rotating board of people who all take turns being on what we call the civics board, which essentially holds trial. And there's evidence presented, and they determine whether a rule was broken or not. And then they can basically hand out what we call sentences. At one point, the kids thought it would be, well, I think actually the adults and the kids thought it would be cool to try a more restorative justice approach. And so they changed the judicial system. The thing about the social justice thing was that it took a lot longer than the other judicial process. It was more focused around, like, we have to come to a full agreement and understanding about what happened, and there has to be this kind of this healing that happens. And then after a year of that, the kids were kind of like, I value my time more than I value this process. So if I can choose between going to civics board for 20 minutes when I break a rule versus going to this restorative justice process, which is going to take 4.5 hours of my day, I'm like, my self-reflection is that I value my time enough that creates my willingness to engage in this process over this one.
Right.
And this is where, when you're an adult inside this school, you have to really, this is the same thing about guiding forest therapy. It's not about you. Right. Like, you're not here to make them do a particular thing or have a particular experience. You're there to hold space for them to have their process and to try different things. And you have to kind of keep that ego in check. I mean, the adults are also voting members of the school community. So, you know, the adults can advocate, but it's not, there's no like veto power that the adults have. So if everyone kind of decides we don't want to do this, the adults can't say, well, do it or I will quit.
They can, I guess, and then they quit. The kids will say, right.
And then the kids would hire someone else probably.
Yeah. Who's more open?
So it's kind of funny because when I got trained as a forest therapy guide, I was also in the process of founding the school. And the big learning journey for guiding forest therapy, and this isn't so much of a problem when someone reads the book, because the book can't boss you around. Mm-hmm. Like, the book is, it has suggestions, but it can't make you do anything. There's a different dynamic when you're working with people face to face, because if I'm a guide, there's projection onto me from the group that I'm the expert, that I must know a lot about this, that somehow I have like nature connection superpowers.
Yes.
Right? And so a lot of the real challenge of training people to be guides is really getting them to embody and understand the idea that it's not about them. And whether the results are, this or that, you can feel good about them being real. They're not contrived because you kind of manipulated people into having a good experience. Like, the whole thing about this, the school and about the forest bathing in a way is letting people have their own experience and really honoring that those experiences have equal integrity, and that we judge people's experiences constantly all the time. Like, it's a big part of our ego culture. And especially when you're in a leadership position, there's a strong urge to be evaluating people and being like, because you want validation, right? If people are having these big, great experiences, it makes you feel like you did a great job. But, in forest therapy, we say the forest is the therapist, the guide opens the doors. With my book, it's like, you have to learn how to do this. I can't do this for you.
Right.
There's not like an expert out there that can tell you how to be nature, because you already are. You just haven't quite figured out how to put it together again. I love this word remember, because, there's this true etymology of remember, which connects it to the word memory and mind, and basically remembers to put it back together in your mind. But then there's this folk etymology of remember, which is the opposite of dismember. So to remember is to put the body back together. I think that's like the image I have in my imagination sometimes when people are doing this kind of work, is kind of, it's a reclaiming, it's a remembering, it's a putting ourselves back together. Because this is where we started. Like, we all started in a state of essentially absolute freedom and self-direction. No one taught you how to walk. No one taught you how to talk. No one taught you how to smell or listen to birds. You figured all of that out. It was all just encoded in your body. Like, it all unfolded completely naturally. So how do we remember what it feels like to just be what we are, what our natural selves are? So I guess that's kind of the connecting link between my work with the school and my work in forest bathing. Is it's like, can I help you remember something about what it feels like to just relax? And so you're not striving to be someone else.
Right.
You're just really here, and it's okay. It's all okay to just be what you are in this moment. Most of our educational experiences are oriented around who we will be at the end of the process. You go to like an open house for a school, and they'll have these big banners, and it'll be like, critical thinkers and compassionate listeners. And it's like, okay, so if I send my kid to this school, then it's like a factory. Like, at the end, they're going to be all these things. You're going to make sure that they're all these things. And not that these are bad things, but I'm just like, well, what about if you didn't exert that kind of force upon people, and you really created an open space for them to have process around, well, who would you be if you weren't being told who to be?
Yeah. If you were just being able to be yourself.
Right.
Yeah. And all of its embodiment and everything that means.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's kind of a remembering that happens on that psychological level of like who we are naturally. And I have a complicated relationship with this idea, because I keep coming back to this feeling that, nature is completely dynamic. It's never the same. It's constantly changing. In every single microsecond, so much is happening inside and outside of us. It's like, when you really try to imagine what it looks like at, a quantum level, or even at a cellular level, like, there is this unbelievable thing happening right inside my body right now. Right. So it's always changing. So when we talk about this thing about being who we are and having a sense of authenticity, for me, the interesting thing is like the idea of an authentic Ben is abstract, and it kind of precludes me from having the freedom to experience myself in completely new ways, where I don't have to be the way I think I should be, or that I consider myself as. Like, is this just fidelity to the abstraction of who I think I am? That's what we're calling authenticity. So I think part of the remembering at a psychological level is that you don't have to be trapped in the idea of the character that you're playing. You can really emerge out of that and experience yourself in many ways. It's not about figuring out who you are and then sticking to it. Right. That's like the fallacy of a lot of, well, for me, I'll just say this is my opinion. That's the fallacy of a lot of early education models and even early adult education models, like going to college. It's like, figure out who you are, and then that's who you're going to be for the rest of your life. That doesn't actually work because you're still developing, you're still changing. So it's not that we're trying to figure out who we are, it's we're figuring out how to be dynamic and how to like allow ourselves to be changing all the time. And that's wonderful.
It's beautiful.
That doesn't mean you're being inauthentic. That means you're experiencing yourself in a dynamic way.
Yeah.
And then at the level of embodiment, the remembering is just so simple that it's like, I love when people get to that point in the training where we ask them to do what is known as mindful eating. You know, just take one piece of food and just take 5 minutes to really experience what it is like to eat this piece of food. And it's like the level of sensory detail just skyrockets.
Right.
And this is interesting because we understand this neurologically now, that basically the brain is built to conserve energy. And so right now, you're very focused on the words that I'm saying. That's where all of your energy and attention is going. And right now, your body is receiving a ton of sensory information from wherever you're sitting in your living room or whatever it is. But you're actually not registering consciously most of the details because your brain is focused on doing something else. Like where we put our attention amplifies whatever we're experiencing. So when we actually remember how to put our attention on the embodiment, on the sensory experience, it's almost like you step into this hyper real world, you know, that all of a sudden you're seeing things that you've walked by a million times, like going and seeing a leaf on a tree and really getting, you know, a couple millimeters away from it, just really seeing what is there. It's kind of like astonishing, you know, it really wakes people up in a way. It's like, how much of this place am I constantly missing?
I did a virtual walk a couple of weeks ago, and there was people in Singapore. The company was in Singapore, and they had people dialing in from 7 different countries, I think, dialed in. And one of the participants was in this office. It was a lab/office in Singapore. And, you know, I invited them. I can't remember what I invited them to go outside and do. Well, didn't even have to go outside, but she chose to go outside. And when she came back in for the Gather, Share and Listen, she was like, I've been working here for 5 years and I've never seen the flower bed just outside the door. Because she'd come into work in the morning with her phone and she'd be, you know, hurrying into the office, and then in the evening she'd be hurrying off to get home, and she would walk past this flower bed every day for 5 years. She'd never noticed it, and she walked out, and for the first time she saw all the colours and touched the textures and smelt the flowers, and she was almost in tears. She was like, how incredible. And another one of the participants was living in an apartment in Singapore, and he felt very constrained by being in the apartment. And he said, oh, blow it, I'm going up to the roof. He'd never been to the roof of his apartment building before. And he got up there and he discovered that people had put a garden and that there were ants and there were birds. And he's from Austria. And here he is living in an apartment in Singapore. And he had a very profound connection home. It reminded him of the nature at home. And he said, I've never been to the top of this building before. And it was just a simple invitation to, you know, just to go out and search for something or, you know, experience something. I can't remember the exact invitation, but it had this profound experience on people. And as you say, it was their experience. It wasn't like, right, I need to get this bloke to the roof of his apartment so that he can have this. I didn't even know where he was. And they had the experience, and therefore it became so much more profound for them because it was their experience. So, Ben, I wanted to ask you, one of the most amazing, I mean, the 6-month forest therapy guide training for me was a very profound experience, and but probably the big moment came early for me in the training. I think it was module 3. I think we had 14 modules. Module 3. And I know that you and Amos and I think Nadine wrote most of those modules, but I think you were the lead author. And the one that blew me out of the water, quite frankly, was the Way of the Guide. And I've spent a lot of my time mediating disputes between companies and NGOs and getting people to talk to each other. You know, put down your weapons, come into the room. We're not going to make any progress unless we have a chat. And I just found that, and because I'm a forester, and because we were talking about deforestation and things like this, that I sort of had some sort of, I had some sort of perceived expertise about this, but well, the subject matter was avoiding deforestation. That wasn't what we needed in that moment. It was helping people find a way of talking to each other. And I read The Way of the Guide, and I've probably read it about 10 times, I reckon, since. It just moved me very deeply. And I love I didn't get it here to read it, but it was at the end where the text said, the guide knows nothing. And I almost fell off my chair when I read that the first time. It was like, yes, that we know nothing. And we're just here to help people come together. And as soon as you cross that boundary and start trying to direct outcomes, it invariably just falls apart, and you become part of the problem. And I honestly, I remember reading that, the guide, you know nothing. I'm like, yes. And I just want to say how amazing it was to read that. But maybe you can just tell us a little bit about The Way of the Guide, mate, and the philosophy behind that. I mean, we've touched on it, I think, already, but it's just such a beautiful, beautiful concept.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably some different ways of offering an explanation or analysis of Way of the Guide. For me, I think the thing that makes the most sense is that it intersects a lot with a Taoist approach to leadership. Taoism has this concept called Wu Wei, which is kind of the path of non-action.
Yeah.
Just letting things unfold and understanding that everything is in its own process. And that when we encounter things that make us uncomfortable or promote the development of like our ego story, we can often get sucked into doing things that we don't need to do. I guess, like for me, Way of the Guide is kind of just a sense of grappling with the ego story of who we are. And I think I just wrote this blog post about this, about maybe the imprint of Joseph Campbell's analysis of the hero's journey on our cultural psyche has left us with the idea that we all need to be heroes. We all want to be kind of super special, and we want to have gone on a long journey and slayed dragons and climbed sacred mountains and have all these experiences. And then I kind of wonder if, this is a journey that the destination has arrived before a single step has been taken. It's like you've built it up in your head as being an outer journey when really it's an inner journey. And the Way of the Guide is kind of just a pathway to understanding that. Because you notice this constantly when you're guiding. Like, I mean, I'm not above saying that I still experience the egoic thoughts. I'm just good at containing them and putting them aside. Because it happens naturally, I think. We get triggered when we're in a leadership position and we don't feel like we're in control, or that we're not kind of delivering the thing that we're hoping is going to be experienced. And so that reveals to us that we have an agenda and a set of expectations. And then you can really apply this to your entire life. Like, that's kind of the thing for me about Way of the Guide, is it's certainly a helpful leadership model for forest therapy. And I think also a helpful leadership model in other ways, but it also applies to all of our relationships. That we tend to want people to be who we want them to be instead of who they are. And that applies also to relationships with the more than human world, where it's like we feel tension that the tree is growing in a way that we don't want it to grow. And so we just cut it down. It's like this need to control what is going on around us so that it is kind of in harmony with our ego story is a really like deep thing in how we operate. And I notice that most of this, I think, comes from fear. I think there's actually kind of three levels of what we could call like the dark ecology experience of this journey, where at some point people hit a point of grief. And I think that's kind of the first doorway, is really feeling like this is so hard because there's so much dying here. And I feel so much grief about this. There was like this really cool invitation I offered recently where we were by a creek, and I had invited people to simply carry water in their hands to living beings along the creek. And this woman came back and we talked about it after the walk. And she was saying, it really kind of made me sad in a way because I wanted to get water to this particular flower. And every time I would get there, all that would be left on my hands was a few drops. And I thought to myself, this is so beautiful that like what you're talking about is the grief of not being able to save everything, but also the beauty of being able to offer just a few drops. And so there's this incredible doorway of grief, and grief is not really accepted in our culture. So people have to work through that. Then I think there's this doorway of anger, and anger, I think, is really not permitted in our society. And you have to kind of work through this place of feeling angry that there is so much suffering. And when you touch that anger, it really lights up that hero archetype. Because when you hit that doorway, the reaction is generally, I need to save the world.
Right.
Like, I need to make this better. And that's the only thing that will get rid of this anger. And then once you work through that, I think you finally come to this bottom of the well, which is fear, which is really the most vulnerable of all of these psychological experiences, because you have to grapple with impermanence at that point. You have to really understand that my need to control things is basically like swimming upstream, or it's a Sisyphean task. Like, I can be angry and grieving and fearful for the rest of my life. What would it be like if I really allowed the world to unfold and really started trying to see the beauty in what is happening without judgment and without a need to change it? This is where Taoism kind of comes in handy as a philosophical system, because it's not, well, without making too much of a distinction between religious Taoism and philosophical Taoism, but philosophically, Taoism is not a moral system. It doesn't begin with an idea that there is kind of a right way that the world should be. And I think this is really reflected in what it means to be ecological, what it means to be nature. Because the earth doesn't have, well, this is my feeling. My feeling is the earth doesn't have a preference for what state of ecology it is currently in. Like, the earth understands itself reflexively as a dynamic and incredibly powerful changing system. So yeah, there's going to be 300 million years of ice age. Then there's going to be this volcanic period. Then there's going to be a proliferation of multicellular life forms. And the earth, I think, sees equal beauty in all phases. But humans, I think this is where the fear comes in. And maybe this is the thing we're trying to learn from the more than human world, or from the nature that we are, is like, you don't have to be afraid of what you are. And what you are is earth. And you're always going to be attached to this in some way. You're always going to be kind of coming back and remembering, or the earth is remembering itself in a million different ways. The Tao kind of is the prime force that moves what they call the 10,000 things, all the things. The Tao is not trying to get somewhere. It's just pushing everything into motion, and everything is happening. And when we can learn how to, work through our grief, resolve the anger, and put that fear down, I think we can come into kind of a state of identifying with the earth that for me is very hopeful. I think some people sometimes get the idea that I'm a little bit of a nihilist, because I'll say things like, well, it's not it's not up to me to judge whether this is a good world or a bad world, because I see nature as fundamentally good, and I see nature as fundamentally dynamic. So it's not that it's good and it's static. It's not that it has achieved a state of goodness. It's good because it's always moving. It's always shifting. And maybe human civilization ends someday. Maybe this thing that we have is impermanent, just like us. And then that for me is where I do the most profound work in understanding an ecological identity, like actually learning to identify as Earth instead of related to Earth or born out of the Earth. It's like, no, this body is Earth. It's all Earth.
Yeah.
And then you start understanding what people, are talking about Thich Nhat Hanh and this thing about interbeing. There's this capping phrase in the Zen capping phrase book. I think it says, in the clean mirror of sky, there is no private self. And so this thing about the fear is like, well, if I'm not Ben, then who am I? And we really want to hold on to that ego, that private self. It's like, I am not the rest of this. Like, please, like, I need to be me. I need to have this private entity, this thing that is mine. It's like, I own it. I have it. I possess it. And it's like, well, you are also going to, when the body decides it is time, you will remember how to let go of that private self, because that's just going to happen. So you could wait until the end, which is fine. A lot of people wait until the end, and I think that's fine. We have a lot of good coping mechanisms. We've evolved a lot of good coping mechanisms, and our sense of separateness might be one of them. That we like feeling separate because it feels safe.
Yeah, we don't have to suffer so much.
Right.
Ben, I think we could talk for another 4 hours, mate.
Yeah, probably.
I think we've got to come to an end. But before we do that, I'd really, you wrote a beautiful poem in 2017. I know it was 2017 because that's what it says in your book. And it does talk about remembering. And I wonder if you could read it for us.
Yeah, sure.
To close up our podcast. But before you do that, I just want to thank you. And as I said, I think we could talk for a long time. I find what you say fascinating. I'm sure everyone else will as well. Just a quick word before you read the poem, maybe just in this moment, but what do you where do you think the future is headed for yourself and the things that you're doing?
Yeah, I don't know.
Tomorrow you'll find out what tomorrow holds for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm thinking about writing another book. I really had a lot of fun writing this book, so I think I might write another book about what it means to be ecological, kind of a deeper exploration of that question.
I should mention also, and I will mention in the text that we put with the podcast, you've got a new training course that you're leading as well, right? You might just tell us quickly about that. What's it called?
It's called Finding Nature in Yourself, Finding Yourself in Nature. And yeah, it's essentially an 8-week journey that kind of leads us through some questions about what does it mean to have an ego, and what does it mean to be without it and to identify as Earth. And then the idea is not to necessarily come to a conclusion, but to come to a point of synthesis that honors each person's journey. So I always say, with this course, I'm really not here to teach you anything. I'm here to create an aesthetic experience through which you can explore your own process. And I think that's kind of, that's maybe where I see myself moving with this. I'm kind of having this weird moment of wondering whether I'm a facilitator or an artist or both. Because I love the concept of creating experiential art that is like, well, when you're creating art, you're really not in charge of what people take away from it.
Right.
I love that. I just think that's really amazing.
Yeah. Well, we look forward to it. And one of the things that I think is on your agenda is a bit of travel when that's possible again. And so we look forward to welcoming you here in Switzerland. And that'd be wonderful to come and visit some of the forests here. Invite you to come and say good day to the forests. That'd be terrific.
I would love to.
Yeah, no, I'd love to have you, mate. Well, listen, beautiful poem. It comes at the end of your book. If you could read it for us, I'd be so grateful.
Sure. Deep in the canyon, a tree is imagining your return. A river is remembering your name. And a pebble is dreaming of you waking up in sunlight. The whole world is wondering if you can find the gift that you left for yourself before you were anything that you would even recognize. Deep in the canyon, you are preparing to encounter yourself and laughing at the thought that you were ever separate from all that is. Your heart opens and sees the circle of time, and it lovingly asks itself how many moons have passed since you last witnessed yourself in this universe.
Ben Page, 2017. Forest therapy guide and trainer. Thank you so much for talking to us, Ben. I so appreciate it, mate.
Thanks for having me, Scott. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, well, we look forward to reading more of your books and seeing what you do in the future. I'm sure you'll help a lot of people on their journey, so good on you, mate.
Thank you.